Let 'Em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hey everybody, it is April the 22nd, 2022 as I record this introduction. It's another gorgeous spring day where I live, but it also happens to be Earth Day. And while this conversation is not dedicated to conservation or the great outdoors, it is a conversation about a different kind of preservation and nature, which is the safeguarding of childhood and protecting our children's sense of wonder and love of learning. Sue Patterson likely needs no introduction because she has been involved in the homeschooling and unschooling community for over 2 decades. With 3 grown children and 1 grandchild, she sits in that wonderful space of reflection and can offer us her unique perspective and insight. Sue is candid about the fears she had, including worrying about what other people would think. I so enjoyed talking to Sue and taking in her wisdom and her humor. I have a feeling you will too. Here is my conversation with Sue Patterson of Unschooling Mom to Mom.
I'm Sue Patterson, and I'm really excited to be here to talk with you today about unschooling and our experiences that we had while my 3 kids were growing up, and we chose this unconventional path. And my kids now are 33, 31, and 28. And so one of the things that is really cool about where I sit now on this continuum is that I can look back at where I had hesitations, where I had worries, and see that they didn't pan out. And so what I can come and bring you is some confidence. I can tell you with 100% confidence that unschooling works, and that all of those fears that you have might need to be worked through a little bit, but you don't have to drag the kids into it, into your fear, you know? And so that's what I've built an entire coaching business on, is helping families see how to get past their fear so they can embrace unschooling and have the life they're meant to have. So I do one-to-one coaching. I have all things unschooling mom to mom. So I have a website and a podcast and a YouTube channel and Facebook group and Instagram. So if you're looking for me, you can find me at Unschooling Mom to Mom in whatever social platform you're looking for. But my whole goal, it's like I'm on a mission to help people figure out how they don't have to duplicate school. They can do this because we are hardwired to learn, and we will be able to bring our kids into the world, have the experiences they need to have for their unique path. So I'm super excited to be here, and I'm eager to answer your questions.
Thank you, Sue. There's so much that you've already said that I want to parse out. Specifically the idea that, it's your mission to help people connect to what works for them. And I recently was updating my site because I have a blog, and that was kind of my original way of sort of starting into this world, was just all the thoughts I had in my head. I just needed a place for them to go. But then it became a little bit dusty and a little off to the side, had some cobwebs on it. And I was like, I think my site needs a little attention. So I just recently updated it to say, that my mission was to help connect families, letting go of the school idea, but focus more on education, and also to go from powering over to empowering their kids. Yeah. Because I do feel like once you start down this path of unschooling and seeing school from a very different lens, it immediately connects to how you relate to your children and what parenting paradigm you are in and what you want to continue doing or not doing. And so I've of course, with your children being older, and now that you have this option, this wonderful view of being able to look back on your life and go over specific things that you did or didn't do, I would love to go a little bit more into that if that's okay. We can
Sure.
even just kind of
Sure.
talk about your journey. Like, how did unschooling find you, or you find it, and where did that all start? And just kind of like, I'd love to just walk down that road with you.
Yeah. A little memory lane.
Yes.
Well, it was the 90s,
Mm.
and, I had 3 kids, and we were doing daycare and, preschool, and we were a military family, so we lived on a base, and, my son went off to kindergarten, and I remember when we first got to kindergarten, and they gave this big list of all the things he was gonna do there, um and he could already do them. He could
Mm.
count to 100. He could, he had that oldest child thing. It wasn't that he was super brilliant. Love you, Michael. But he was just curious, and I was like all in. And so he could read early, and so he already could do all these things. And I said, what are you going to do with him if he can do this list?
Mm.
Oh, we'll just reinforce.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't long before he's bringing that red folder home that Michael's dueling with pencils in the back of the room with somebody else. And, one thing after another. And they're like, we would love to test him for being gifted, but he won't sit still. I'm like, oh, yeah, he doesn't really like to do that.
And this was how old? Like 3, 4?
He was 6.
Oh, 6.
So
Okay.
he was in 5. He was in kindergarten.
Oh, that's right. You
So
said kindergarten.
He
Okay.
had I remember preschool teachers having little cryptic things to say to me, like, it's going to be interesting. You're like, what does that mean?
All right.
I'm a real people person, so I pick up on those little cryptic things people say. And so at the time I had, Katie, my middle child, had a bunch of learning, auditory processing problems. And so we were really immersed in that. It was really frustrating. She had a hard time understanding language or speaking. And so we were dealing with all that kind of neurodivergent stuff. And then I had this baby. And so I'm like, okay, we're just going to wing it. He'll be all right. He'll be all right. We all do this. I had only met one other homeschooling family in our whole life, and they were kind of weird. And they made us have, let's have snacks. They never let us come in their house. And I'm like, what is going on here? And that was my one exposure to it. So I never really gave it another thought. And so kindergarten happened, and then he moved to first grade, and he started to not like learning. This kid that had really loved learning. And so I was doing a yoga class with somebody who had these grown homeschooled kids. And I'm like, tell me more about this, because I had peeked my head in the kitchen, and her kids were like pushing soap bubbles into each other's faces while they were doing dishes, doing normal kid stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's not just for weirdos. And she's like, no, it's not. And it was interesting because they were a religious family, and they were homeschooling for religious reasons. And she said, oh, all kinds of people are starting to homeschool now. It was probably 1995. And I thought, yeah, I'm probably exactly who you're afraid of, but I'm going to pick your brain. And so I didn't say that's not our motivation. And so she told me more about it. And back then there wasn't really the internet very well. I mean, you certainly you had to collect catalogs. And so I'm collecting all these catalogs. I'm like, what can I find that is, at the time it was a lot of religious materials. And I'm like, what is some kind of secular, although I didn't know that word, material? It wasn't, we were Episcopalian, but we weren't doing this for religious reasons. And I'm like, there's got to be a math where you're not counting shepherds. And so I found, I don't know if you mean this to be so long.
It's fine.
First grade's happening. He's getting more and more bummed about it. I'm looking at these big third graders and thinking, wow, they're little zombies walking around in here. Then the school was renovating their playground, so he had to play quietly between the buildings for recess.
Wow.
That wasn't going well for a kid that really needed to run around the buildings a couple of times. And so they said they did get him into the gifted program, which of course happened during PE.
Oh, geez.
And so you're like, somebody is not having like a big picture look at this. And
It's like they don't even understand how children develop.
exactly. And I've always thought that like they have some really great educational research out there and they're not following it. And so I started talking more to that lady who homeschooled her kids, and I decided, okay, that's it. We're about to move from San Antonio to Alaska. No one will know what we're doing. We'll just do it. And then I'm like, Michael, don't tell anyone. Oh yeah, the next day the teacher says, "Can I talk to you?" I'm like, "Oh, that kid in his mouth," and because he's kind of like his mom, and she said, "So, Michael says that you're going to homeschool next year," and I had all those feelings of kind of embarrassment and who do I think I am to do this, and all the things that people come to me and say, oh, and I'm like, oh, I get it. I know what you're feeling.
Right.
And I said, well, we're going to try it. I think we'll try it with the move coming and we'll just make this shift. And she said, can I just tell you how excited I am for you?
Wow.
She said, my little sisters were homeschooled. Like, you're kidding. She said, and I'm going to tell you a story that's going to really reassure you. I'm like, okay. And she said, we were talking about the solar system. And so this is first grade. And Michael said, what about the moons around Jupiter? And what are they called? And he was asking some things about it. And, oh, Michael, that's in fourth grade. And she said, and I watched his little eyes kind of calculate how far away fourth grade was from where he was right now. And she said, and his little shoulders slumped. And I was sad, but I just didn't have time in the agenda to get into it. And I don't even know if I know about the moons around Jupiter. I know the first grade level. And she said, so now Michael can learn all about the solar system. You can spend as much time as you want on that. I love that for him. And we did, in fact, decorate his whole room in the solar system.
That's amazing.
Then that was kind of the jumping off place. And so they gave me, we were about to move. It was the end of the school year. They gave me this sealed envelope of his school records that said, do not open.
Okay.
Like,
why not?
Because it's from school to school.
Oh.
I wasn't supposed to open that.
Okay.
So of course I dig right in. I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? And
you paid for those records, right? That's
right,
that's public
this is
school
my
money.
Kid. You guys don't get to be whispering about my kid.
Not at all.
And how dare you? But I had remembered there had been something that had happened during first grade that he was doing this word list. And I said, well, what if you think of it like this? And I was kind of helping him kind of understand some rhyming aspect of it. And he said, oh, the teacher said that your parents might try to show you other ways, but don't listen to them.
Really?
Yeah.
And this was in when? 1990?
95.
Wow. Okay.
And I thought, oh, don't you do that. And so I thought, yeah, that's as I recall, just that schools wanted to be in charge.
Yeah.
And anybody else that's going to try to jockey for that in charge position, they're going to do all they can to knock that down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, not on my watch. So we went to Alaska and we got, this is the funny, we ordered Calvert. School in a box is their tagline.
Okay.
But it was what I thought was okay. And, it wasn't flat earth. It wasn't, okay, we're all right. And because I didn't trust myself, I paid for the teacher thing too, so that I would have teacher oversight because I needed accountability. And I didn't. And so here we are in Alaska, and he's in he's being told in his little writing section, he liked the reading books, and we did those, and they were a little flat and dry, but okay, we still could go to the library. And he they wanted him to write about they had a picture of a little red convertible, and there are no little red convertibles in Alaska.
I can only imagine.
And I said, you know what? We had an earthquake, and a baby moose came up to the window and nuzzled where his hand was, and he wants to write about that.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, oh, but the letters don't connect correctly.
Mm.
And I was like, so here I'm trying to make him write about the red car, and he's crying, and I'm mad, and I'm like, it's just 3 letters, just write. You know, and I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is exactly, only now I'm front row seat. I'm the warden of this place. I'm not doing that. And I am not going to create, I was already a writer. I'm not going to create a kid that hates writing.
Right.
And so we had a little ceremonial breaking of the pencils. We will not write for that woman in Baltimore. And and so that was the start of our kind of, I think we're going to do this differently. We had met some people there that were eclectic, a lot of eclectic people, and a lot of unschooling curious people. And so we kept sharing information, and there was a support group that was, I don't know if they still call them this, but back then we called them statement of faith groups.
Okay.
Where you had to sign a thing that said you believed a certain religious platform to be part of their group. And I thought, all right, I'll just sign it and see if I can find anybody else that's kind of on the fringe. And so I did that. It was a group that only the men could be in charge. There were no women in the leadership roles of their very tightly set up group. And, it was obviously not a good fit for me, but
it's a learning experience nonetheless.
Oh my
right?
gosh, it sure was. And so I met this woman. I met a lot of really interesting people there, including like preachers' wives who said, I won't sign that statement of faith. That's a tool to exclude people.
Oh, wow.
And that is contrary to what we are about. I'm like, you go, girl. This is great. And it was interesting because the Hegners, I don't know if you know who they were. Helen and Mark Hegner were the publishers of Home Education magazine.
Okay.
Which was the second. I mean, there was Growing Without Schooling and Home Education magazine, and they were the only 2 magazines that were out about home education that didn't come from a religious perspective. We had Mary Pride's stuff. We had The Teaching Home. We had all these things that were Christian homeschooling magazines. And so Helen and Mark lived not very far from me. And so because I'm an organizer, I'm like, let's do a mom's night out. Let's try to share information. Let's do group activities. Let's go to the nature center. And so I started setting up things like that. And next thing you know, Helen's like, I think we should meet.
Yeah.
And so she came to our mom's night out, and she talked a lot about unschooling. And I'm like, this just makes so much sense.
Right.
And the word itself seemed kind of in your face. I'm like, well, why'd you pick that word? Because I didn't pick it. And at the time, because I was still really indoctrinated in the typical traditional way of schooling, and I had put my middle child into half-day kindergarten because I thought, I can't do both at once. I can only focus on Michael while we figure this out. And, I forgot to tell you that when he was in school, they said for 2nd grade, he'll need ADD medicine.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, that was like my straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
We're not medicating him for your convenience. And then it was like, no wonder those kids look like zombies.
Right.
But all right. So Katie did her kindergarten stint reluctantly. So she had these processing problems. And so I'll never, and I share this story because we all have moments where we are not necessarily the mom we wish we were. you know? And I don't want people to think, well, I'm not cut out for it because I'm not as whatever people assume other people are.
Yeah.
And so the kindergarten teacher, they did this in the 90s. They did this forced hugging as they come down the sidewalk before they get into your car. And the teacher would hug the child. And then they'd get in your car. And it would be one after another. And it came to Katie's turn, and she said, maybe tomorrow you'll like me better, Miss Bounds.
Oh.
And I'm like, what is that about? And she's like, oh, Katie, I love you. It's fine. All is fine. All is well. I'm like, what made my kid say that?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't say that. And she still had 2 more weeks, and heaven knows we didn't want to be kindergarten dropouts. So we finished those 2 weeks, even though in my heart of hearts, I had like this lead weight in my chest sending my kid there. But I thought it was what we had to do. And then after kindergarten, we were done.
Mm-hmm.
And so the short version is we were regular suburban school's the way to go, even though I had kind of I don't really like school feeling from my own background.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it just needs to be done right. I'll help them. I'll volunteer in class. I'll do all these things. So I was that kind of suburban mom, soccer mom, all of that. And then we decided school wasn't good enough, that we could at least do 2nd grade and 1st grade. And then we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
And as we learned more, we just didn't look back.
Right.
And we're like, no, this is too fun to walk away from. Why would we do this? Michael was like, Mom, they took away one of our field trips. So we only had one last year. We can have field trips any day we want.
Absolutely.
I'm like, I know. Isn't that great?
Life is a field trip. Like, we don't need to schedule little tiny moments.
Gosh, yes.
Yeah. Right.
So that's my story.
Wow. And so your
like,
oldest,
that was an hour and a half later.
No, it's not. So your oldest made it to 2nd grade or 1st grade, and then your youngest was in kindergarten, and then your
1st grade. My middle finished kindergarten,
and your youngest never went.
My youngest did. Well, she did, because my mom was like, well, Alyssa's not like Katie. Alyssa would love preschool. The neighbors are going. And I talked to them. We lived on a base. And I talked to the neighbors, and she could ride with them to the preschool, and I'll pay for the preschool. And this way you can focus on Katie and Michael. And she'd like to go. I talked to her about it already. And I'm like, oh, talk about overstepping. So I let her go to preschool. She did. I mean, it was a play-based preschool. It was fine.
Right.
And, but that was all we were going to do. And so she did do that. And then later, because she was the youngest and there were a couple of things she wanted to do, she did go to high school for a year and a half. And she wanted that experience. She wanted to be on the drill team at halftime. She wanted to know people in the neighborhood that didn't live all the way across town,
right?
Because that's one of the things about the community is it's kind of spread out. And so she had that experience and left after a year and a half.
Well, and I think
that was not the Lizzie McGuire movie I had thought it was going to be.
Well, I think that speaks to the reality for so many families, that if we were able to have the option to flow into different spaces that speak to our individual children and maybe even where our family is at that point in time, that we might pick and choose a little school every so often, maybe some preschool, then some homeschool, that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And that people,
it's too bad it's not set up like a library or a community college where you can say, I think I want to take that photography class.
Absolutely.
I think I want to, and have it be just interest-based. It's just,
Well, that's my goal. That's my dream, I would say. I've thought about this for many, many years about how I would love for schools to turn into community centers.
Oh, I know.
And allow the people who are
dreams like that for a long time.
Just let there be places that you can tap in and out of, utilize as you need for what you need, and then you're good.
Right.
So, well, there's so much that you said to pull it together as far as like you expressed that you had some internal dialogue that felt uncomfortable about what was going on with your children.
Yeah.
And yet you continued to ignore it because that's what you do. You know, a system has been created, a framework has been put into place. There's so many people who've done it before you. Who are you to challenge this?
Right.
Like, why would you even think to challenge this? Aren't you putting your kids at a disadvantage? Are you possibly creating a
Ruining their
situation?
lives.
Yeah, that you're
Possibly ruining their lives, ruining their
Mhm.
chances for success.
Yes, yes. So that speaks to that big thought that does float around quite often. And then the second thing is the community aspect, how important it is to find other people
Right.
who are interested and curious and asking those questions, because it does create that situation where you feel heard and seen and supported. And so as homeschoolers have continued to increase in numbers throughout the last decade, um, that community piece is so vital.
Right.
And that's why I believe social media has done what it has done in such a positive way, is it's allowed people to connect across a world. It does not answer that one issue where you brought up about your daughter wanting to have friends a little bit closer, the physical friendship versus the virtual friendship. So how did that eventually evolve for you and your family to create that community now that you're now 100% you're in homeschooling? You know, what did that look like for you all?
So I'm kind of a people gatherer. That's what I do.
You're an organizer.
I'm an organizer.
Yeah.
And so I was setting up field trips and fun activities for kids to do from the get-go. I you know, they had an ice skating group. We joined it. And then somebody else had something else going on. We did that too. And then I talked to parents, would you guys be interested in the nature center, you know, going on a hike once a month or something? And they're like, yeah. They just didn't want to set it up. So I like went to the nature center and said, you know, this class you do on Saturdays for the kids, would you like a test run and do it on Fridays for homeschoolers? And she's like, well, I don't really need a test run. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm like, oh, well, how about, what could I do to make this work? And she goes, well, could you get me some family memberships? And I'm like, yes. How about if they paid $3 a kid and, but they bought a family membership and that they could, and she says, I would do that for you for that. I'm like, excellent. So then we started doing those kinds of things. So we had like every Friday there was something. One of the things I discovered real quickly that the homeschooled crowd, you know, not unschooled, but doing lessons and stuff, because there were people that wanted field trips but didn't want to be unschoolers. And they would use it as like a carrot on a stick. You can go to Sue's thing on Friday if you finish your work. So I'm like, fine, use me.
Yeah.
I just want your kids there for my kids. I don't really care about the rest. And so we had like the nature center one day a week, one Friday. We went to a museum class on another Friday. We did a big park day on another Friday. We had something every Friday. And back then we were handing out paper flyers to let people know. And so we were doing that mom's night out. I'm like, let's get together with other moms on, you know, whatever. And so we did this little coffee shop thing and people just couldn't get enough of it. And so we're like standing in the parking lot after they've closed the place down. We're still talking, but what about, you know, because we were just so fascinated by how this could possibly work. You know, the coffee shop place was like vacuuming under us. I'm like, we don't care. We'll clear our own table. We're carrying our dishes to the back, you know. And it was so nice. But it was just, I always tell people that sometimes you just have to build it.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that you have to build a system with boards of directors or that everybody has to pay in it. You just need a couple families that say, no, we'll come no matter what. And so then you got your core people, and then the other people kind of come and go depending on whether their kids are interested or it's a good day or what, you know, and that's fine. And so we had our little core group of people that the kids just wanted to play together. They didn't really care what we were setting up. And, but I knew if we set up like science or things like that that other people would come to it. And so that's how that started. And then because I knew Helen Hegner, the magazine publisher, and she was really kind of shy. And so she asked me after like a year and a half of doing this, she said, "Will you speak at a graduation in Cordova? Because I don't want to go."
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, "What? They don't want to hear from somebody who has an 8-year-old?" She's actually, they do. And she says, "Just talk about unschooling and how great it is for their kids and how they're ready for the world because they've been in the world and all the things that you say all the time to people." And so that started me on this idea that other people need to hear more about this. And so I had already started writing a little newsletter that I sent out to people. And we built a little website. And, I've been writing. So I had written originally, I think the first thing that I ever wrote about this was for a magazine called The Mother Is Me. And it was a doula magazine that had gotten bought out. And then I don't know whatever happened to it, but I wrote about where have all the thinking parents gone? Why do all these parents have all this great thought about preschool and then they shelve it and put their kid in school? And so that was like the beginning of my evolution into this. But so then I met a few other unschoolers, and then our next stop was California after Alaska. And there are a lot of unschoolers in California. And so everywhere we went, we'd kind of start groups or participate in the state groups or conferences or camping trips or things like that. And that just became how we connected with people.
Yeah. Well, you said about the organizing, one of the early interactions I had with a parent before I went head on into unschooling my family or my kids was, if you plan it, they will come.
Yeah.
And I'm a serial planner myself, and had loved putting together activities. And a lot of it was inspired by what my children enjoyed. So if my kid was into Pokemon cards, I organized a Pokemon get together at the local rec center. And boy, did that take off and went crazy. And it was amazing. And then it was, my daughter enjoyed animals. And so we would put together an event that involved animals. So we'd go to a local farm, or we would ask somebody, like there's this one guy who's a naturalist, and he has his entire basement is like a museum full of all these amazing creatures. And so I called him up. I asked him, "Hey, I'm homeschooling mom. I have 2 kids. We're really interested. We'd love to share this with the community if you're open for it." He was like, "How about you just come by and check it out?" So we got a private tour. Nice. Where my kids got to hold like owls and snakes, and it was just so beautiful and amazing. And then we opened it up to the larger group, and we had to keep it small because it wasn't on a huge space. But the point being that if you pay attention to what your kids enjoy and you know what they would find amazing and interesting, if you just reach out, people are usually so willing to share their interests with you, especially with young children, that they don't have to be a teacher. They don't have to have some business. It's just an interest that they have that your kids share. Generally, you will find that people will say yes over and over and over again. And we've had so many beautiful experiences that way. And I will say that speaks more to my personality. Like, I'm a little bit more outgoing than some of the other people in our homeschool community. And I found too that you had planners and you had participators. So people would come, but they're like, "Please don't ask me to call and schedule it. Like, I'm just good just showing up. Just tell me where, when, what to bring. I'm there." And that's okay too. Like, we need that balance, right? Between people who will very faithfully show up and participate, and those who are willing to take the reins and are comfortable making those plans to organize and to coordinate. My son did a running club. My daughter's ridden horses. Like, there's just been so much fun stuff that they've done. So I guess we can call that the field trips, the field trips of life.
Yeah, I should make a list of all, because I had 3 really different kids with 3 really different interests, and we did a lot of things.
That's a great idea. To put it together.
yeah, would be inspired by, oh, I didn't think of that. And the other thing to remember as you were talking, I was thinking something for people to realize is you don't have to only hang out with
Uh-uh.
unschoolers. You can hang out with anybody that wants to. We would sometimes have school kids come. We were just trying to have an activity where there were people that were interested in the topic
Yeah.
and the kids wanted to see each other.
Right.
Those are really our only parameters. And yeah, and it's so that worked. I had a friend one time who did, back then they called it unit studies a lot. I don't even know if they call it that anymore, but they were more traditional homeschooler. She says, I love having friends who are unschoolers because y'all bring the party. I'm like,
funny.
what? And she said, we can do Greek studies, but when we get ready to have our toga party, we know who to call.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's right.
That's funny.
And so, yeah.
Well, and
we just all merged.
Sorry, say that again.
Okay. We all merged together.
That's right.
In those groups, and it was all right.
Yeah. It is about when people do feel stuck as far as thinking that they might not be able to teach their children or do unschooling. They're looking at it from a school model where you have to segment learning into these different categories and time blocks. Right. Excuse me. Whereas we found that it was all about the interest and then following that. And amazingly, so much learning took place, right? Not really amazingly.
Right.
I'm being sarcastic, but it just, it's fascinating how much learning.
It's a little bit amazing because we are conditioned to believe that you're only going to learn if someone teaches it to you. Someone with more experience, more knowledge. You're the underling.
You're the vessel that needs to be filled.
Exactly. And that isn't really how life works. And I think that when people think about how do you learn as an adult, you don't section your day off into 7 topics. You decide, I want to learn how to build a website, and you go YouTube it. And that's how kids learn. That's how this works, is that they learn the way adults learn. And a lot of times the argument that I'll hear is, but they need the basics. If they don't have the basics, they can't do the things that I can do. And now we have enough data to disprove that simply by, are you kidding me? My 7-year-old grandson can move his way through YouTube faster than a lot of people. And his reading skills are minimum. But I think that the basics are the basics because they weave through everyday life. If they don't, then you don't need it.
Well, and if we peel back the layers to all of that and even look at it from a historical perspective, that's a new phenomenon, this idea that they need the basics. Right. It was created when school was created. Right. Prior to that, people did learn living in life by participating in life and picking up those skills. Now, sure, there's particular skills and ideas and knowledge that is not necessarily something you'll pick up just for living. There's specific skill sets that people would like to learn from, but that's also where, mentorship comes into play. Right. Or, like you said, finding the particular topic on YouTube and delving into it. So my son, who is now 19, and he graduated from our homeschool last year, when he was 14-ish, he had already told me he wanted to build a computer. And so once he started expressing that interest, in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to hire somebody. I'm going to have to research. I'm going to have to learn. But what he was just telling me was expressing, Mom, I'm going to build a computer. It wasn't, Mom, I need you to help me build a computer. Yeah. Right. And so when the time came for him to purchase all of the pieces that he had been researching and watching videos about and learning, and he just, put it all in his little Amazon cart, and we turned 15, he got extra money, and he said, bam, and he purchased it all. Right. And to watch him put that computer together was, even though we had been unschooling from the time he was like 6 years old, it still at that point was like,
stunning.
How did you do that? Yeah. And if anything, it was almost like, visually, it was like this gigantic red flare that just shot into the sky. It was like, you can get in his way as much as you think you are helping him.
Oh my gosh.
And it's so fascinating because as parents, we do have a wonderful skill set that we can share with our kids, but it's not the only skill set that they need. And while we have what things to offer, including the love that we have for our children and the investment that we have in them, because we want them to succeed in life and be happy and joyful and all of those things. If we only think that they need to know what we know, then we are kind of setting them up for failure, because we're limited too.
Right. They're going to, think about the world, how different it is from 10 years ago. And how can we possibly know what they're going to need? You know, there's just no way. And I think too that, well, we have fear. And I think it's really interesting that even though you had been unschooling all along, that you still thought, I don't have that skill set, I'll need to get him a class. And because I think sometimes people think, I'll do my deschooling and then I'll be an unschooler. And, and it doesn't work like that, because not only is it not linear like that, but as you parent kids at different ages, you have different triggers. You have different things that are like, oh gosh, now it's this. You've never been an unschooling parent to an unschooling 14-year-old. And that's different. And so you may suddenly have fear that pops up that says, do what's familiar. And instead, you've got to kind of hand that little fear a piece of bread and say, simmer down. Let me think about this for a second from an unschooling perspective, and talk to other unschoolers, because there's just a lot of ways to help you reframe stuff from the familiar. You know, even the simplest of the couple of Facebook groups, you know, that are like, my unschooler is interested in, or what my unschooler is learning when, ... There's some really great data in there. If you're like, I just need to see that. And I have a membership group that we share those kinds of ideas all the time. Somebody's like, I was so good last month, and this month I'm just eyeing that curriculum. What's the matter with me? And like, because you're still in homeschooling groups and that's all they're talking about. And so it is, you know, it's fine to have lots of different approaches. But if you find that you start to doubt or you start to have fear, then you need to surround yourself with people that don't have doubts and don't have fears. And, you know, so I had like in 2015, 2016, I did this little course for people called Chaos to Confidence. And I was helping them. It was like 12-week course about unschooling. And at the end of it, they were like, well, we like getting together every week. How do we keep doing this? I'm like, oh my gosh, it's really hard. But what if we just made a membership? So I have people that have been in my membership since 2016, just because it's nice to have community.
That's amazing.
You know?
Yep.
It's nice to have people that you can say, my husband was fine with it, and now suddenly he's not. Or I don't know how much to nudge them. You know, those kinds of questions.
Well, and you're bringing up a really important point that I've very much experienced personally, but also with people that I've worked with and interacted with over the last, 12, 15 years, is it's that fear. And when is it insight and concern that's logical? And when is it fear that's based on this idea that was created for you and not from you? Right? So how do parents parse that out? Because not every bit of questioning that comes up is fear. It is just, I'm looking at the world, I'm looking at my family, I'm looking at my child, I'm seeing some things that maybe they might do, it might be better for them if they did A, B, or C. So how do you kind of parse that out with families?
So what we do, and I've because I'm a writer, I have a million, well, not a million. I have a lot of PDFs that somebody has a question and I'll make a PDF for that.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, that's good.
You know, and so lots of times it's exactly like that. How rational is this fear?
Yeah.
Is it rational or irrational? Is it, oh my gosh, if I let this happen, he's going to live under a bridge.
Right. Because
That's
isn't
not
that what we're all
rational.
worried about? Like,
Right. All right. Live in the basement. Except for I don't say that anymore because if you go to Pinterest, there's a lot of really nice basements.
there are some fascinating basements. Yes, there are.
Right. I wouldn't want to move out either.
Uh-huh.
But we're always afraid we're going to create habits or somehow handicap, cripple, cobble to our kids so they can't be successful. And we are not that powerful.
Gotcha.
Is what I really think. I think that we can if we can give our kids the feelings of we can figure this out together. You have a parent that is 100% on your side. You have a parent that listens to you, that doesn't roll their eyes at you talking about Pokemon, or doesn't have a little tisk about another hour of Minecraft. And when you have a parent that is on your side, then you can grow and move in the direction you need to go. Lots of times we didn't have, maybe this is a broad brush, but most of the time, my experience for me, for people I know, we had parents that said, be good in school, do what they say. They were not on our side. They didn't not love us. They loved us. But they thought school was the only way we were going to be okay. And so they did everything they could to push us in that schooly way. But what happens with kids is they don't hear our intention.
No.
They hear, I'm not good enough as is. I must be lazy. What's wrong with me? And why won't she, she doesn't like me when I act like this. And those are not healthy messages to let somebody be brave enough to step out on their own and make choices. That's why we have all kinds of problems with kids that go straight from high school to college and they fall apart with that kind of independence. And, or we're like in our 30s before we want to read again or something. It's because we have been so tightly controlled. And so if we can look at our fears and see, okay, could there be another way? Are there kids that have played a lot on their computers and they turned out okay?
Yes.
And when you ask more questions instead of assume that the standard mainstream answer is right, it's often not right. It might be right in some circumstances, but it's not the only right answer. So that was, back in, I don't even know when I wrote a book called Homeschooled Teens.
Okay.
And I interviewed 75 kids from 19 to 39.
Wow.
And I asked them all the questions that I had heard at conferences, those teen panels that pre-pandemic we used to have conferences, and we would have teenagers come in and they would talk. People could ask questions. Those rooms were packed, but everybody doesn't get to a conference. And so I took like 25 questions of, how did you learn? Did you have trouble getting into college? How did you make friends? Do you hate your mom? All the questions that people had. And all those kids answered. They were so candid. And they're like, it was this. And so it's really nice to hear other stories, because all we hear about from a mainstream world is mainstream answers. And so hearing how these other kids lived and turned out fine, better than fine, that they had skill sets that were unique to them.
Yeah.
And that's really a gift to be able to let your kid have. And it's not that school kids are having a horrible life. Some are. And so that's certainly why I do this coaching stuff, is because I want people to know they have options. If it's not working, let's get out of there. But you have an opportunity to have a fuller, richer life if you have grown-ups in your life who support your interests and help you move in that direction, and you don't have to squeeze that into a tiny window after school or on weekends.
Right. Well, and
And
I think that is the beauty of this lifestyle, which is the way I present it to people when they ask, especially early on. It's more of a lifestyle choice because it's giving us the flexibility and freedom to pursue information and knowledge at a pace that works for us individually, but also gives us the time to really delve into things. So it's not the inch deep, mile wide, it's the mile deep, which our children totally take their time to learn something that they love. And the other piece to it, which really was a huge motivating factor for me to not ignore, but kind of let go of my preconceived notions about what school looked like or education looked like. Because with my background working in classrooms and private and public schools, I assumed my kids would go to school. That's just what you do, right? But what struck me mostly being in the classroom setting and working with kids through an ADHD clinic that I worked at Duke Medical Center was the mental health aspect of our children is so overlooked in favor of academic success. And part of being healthy mentally and have well-being is having autonomy. And if you don't have any control over your life, there's bound to be some issues that will creep up and or express
don't you either
themselves.
Rebel if you don't have autonomy? You either rebel or you cave in.
Yes. So there's that element of, okay, fine, I will do what you want me to do.
Right.
But, you'll see something later, or somebody will just go, oh, well, I don't have any say so, and I'm just going to submit. And, of course, you have people all over the spectrum. You have the very extremes on either end, and then you have everybody in the middle who tends to just kind of flow, but it does depend on that home life setting, right? Like, who do they go home to? How are they supported? What does that look like? But when it comes to the choice to unschool or homeschool, while they are missing out on certain things, they are gaining in others. And that kind of leads me to that podcast that you did, which was the, I'm going to probably forget the exact name of it, but it was like what my kids never learned in school, or maybe what my kids never learned. Right. And then you had like a baker's dozen of 13 things that your unschooled kids did not learn. And if you can remember that, or if you,
I'm pulling it up while
okay,
you say
good.
I'm like, okay, now I have a blank on what it was. But no, I have it. I did want to go back to that one thing you asked about, how do you overcome the fear?
Oh, okay. Yes.
And one of the things is that you see where your fear is not true. See if you can find examples of it isn't valid. And so if you say my kid is never going to learn anything besides Minecraft, and how's that going to help? Okay, let's look at kids who did a lot of Minecraft. Let's look at the learning that happens in Minecraft. Let's look at the meta learning of what happens when you're supportive of what they like to do. And so you start to tease that apart of the benefits, so that the fear comes from it's just not familiar.
Yeah.
And so maybe you want to add some other things. I'm not saying, for some kids, they just really do play Minecraft for a very long time, multiple days, and then they stop. Because then life happens and they're like, I think I'm going to get a job. Or I think I want to do this with these other people. Or the pandemic is over.
Yeah.
And, then they have this opportunity to shift. Whereas if we were busy controlling it and molding it, they didn't get to resolve it. Instead, it just became a power struggle. And when you have a power struggle, you can end up having them hang on to something longer than they would have, because now it's like, I just can't bear her. I told you so. And
it's almost like that clutching, right? They hold on to it because it's like, okay, because any minute it could go away. So I'm going to hold on to it.
Right. And so if you're like, no, you can come back to this as soon as, let's go take the dog for a walk. It's a beautiful day. We've had rain. Let's go do this. When you come back, you can get back on.
Yep.
oh, they're a lot more likely to say okay than if you walk in and say, you've been on that computer for 2 hours. We've got to get outside, and what's the matter with you that you don't
Yeah.
like it that it's a sunny day? And all those typical parents. I have a guide, an unschooling guide about technology, where I have pages of things we might say
Mm-hmm.
and how they might interpret it is not how we mean it. And so what we could say instead,
Yes.
or how we could, and that's part of unschooling too, is that we set the stage for success.
Mm-hmm.
That we have to take a minute and think about, how can I make this go positively?
Mm-hmm.
And that might mean lots of things, like, let's do something immediately after lunch before they get online, or before, where we start to create new patterns, or after dinner, this is a great time for us to do something else, as opposed to saying, you've been on there too long, let's get off of it.
Well, and I do think sometimes the gravitation towards gaming is the low-hanging fruit. If you have activities planned, or if your kids are involved in actively planning your day or your week, then they have these events that they've come up with, that they are invested in. And if you as a parent are sitting around thinking, oh, well, they'll just plan their day because kids are, will create their interest and blah, blah, blah. It's child-led learning, yes, but it's also parent supportive environment.
Right.
And so if you're creating these opportunities to observe your kids and pick their brains and involve them in their lives, then the idea of just video gaming all day is probably going to be few and far between, because you have all these other interesting, exciting, intriguing things taking place too. You can be, cooking together. You could be going on outings to see friends, or day trips, or there's so many other ways to put in the effort to create a rich environment that doesn't involve that, like you said, that back and forth, that battle.
And also, I think that lots of times parents they talk to themselves from a fear base. And so they're like, all he ever does is that computer. All he ever does is whatever. And, but when you talk to them more, they're like, yeah, we do go to Taekwondo.
Yeah.
And we go to, and we do have this thing that we go to see grandma every Thursday. And we have the library, and we have, and so I think sometimes don't let your fear cloud your vision.
Well, and it's that awareness piece too. Yeah. There was this funny meme that went around like a long time ago that I just laughed. It just cracked me up, because it was a parent getting upset with a child watching YouTube, who was watching other kid play video games, or a family. And the mom was like, why are you watching all these people you don't know anything about? And then mom promptly goes into the living room and turns on like a house decorating show, right? And it's, or like
soap opera, or dad's watching a football game, or what's the difference?
I know. It's like, humans enjoy watching other humans, period. It's just what we do. But it is funny, because it's like, okay, if you bring that piece of awareness to the forefront of what are you doing, how do you spend your time, how are you modeling behavior in your home? Are you on your phone all day long? Are you interacting with the computer?
And maybe you do need to brainstorm with them about other ideas, because a lot of times people get that child-led concept, and I just don't really like it, because it's not true. It's more partner-led. And so maybe you subscribe to that for a little while, and so you're like sitting on your hands waiting for your child to unfold beautifully, and they're not
planted in the right soil,
right, and you're not engaging with them and watering it and bringing some cool ideas. They don't know that there's a thing called 365 fun things to do in Austin, Texas. They don't know that. And so look at it with them. Let's go to that Pecan Street Festival. Let's, and if you have not set the stage of, my stuff's more important than your stuff. If instead it's like, we have this huge buffet of stuff. Let's try it all. And then we'll discover, oh gosh, I can't stand that cheese. And then you don't get that cheese on your plate anymore. But that's how you pick and choose and try and do. And so instead of telling yourself, well, I don't know what to do. well, brainstorm. Let's
Mm-hmm.
brainstorm. And sometimes again, having
Yeah.
community that helps you. How did you do it? And how did you figure out what your next steps were? Or all my
Yes,
PDFs.
exactly. Exactly. Go look at those.
Right, right. Okay, so I did pull up this
Okay.
blog post or podcast thing. So, do you want me just to read them off?
Sure. Yeah, let's just go through them.
I could do that. 13 things my unschooled kids never learned. They didn't learn to hate the idea of learning. They didn't learn to wait and wait and wait. They didn't learn how to do the minimum to get the grade. They didn't learn to set aside their interests until the adult in charge decides they can explore on their own. They didn't learn there's only one right answer. They didn't learn to use grades to determine their worth. They didn't learn to make fun of people who didn't conform, seemed a little different, or weren't considered popular. They didn't learn to guard their work from others. They didn't learn that collaborating and working together was cheating. They didn't learn that you can only be friends with kids the same age as you. They didn't learn to distrust the adults or believe that the grown-ups were the enemy. They didn't learn much about bluffing. They didn't learn not to ask questions or appear to not know something. Their curiosity pushed them to want to know more, not just appear smart. They didn't learn to downplay their intelligence to fit in. And they didn't learn the importance of conformity or the mistaken idea that conformity is what leads to success. So I just have, it's no wonder so many of us grow up to be people pleasers.
Oh, that's so good, Sue. That's so good.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, there's so much in there.
Yeah.
The grade part, it is as somebody who worked in schools and
Uh-huh.
interacted with kids
Uh-huh.
and tutored and graded, that was a piece for me that felt so wrong, to take somebody's hard effort and their attempt at something that was given to them by somebody else that they had no say so in, and then to turn around and tell them, you did terrible at this, here
It's
it
a C
is, do
plus.
it over
It's a
again.
C plus.
And it's just, instead of that the other piece that you mentioned, the collaboration part, like that's where the gold is, when we can come together and use
Right.
all of our
Well, and it is what companies are writing about, saying we want kids that can collaborate. We want kids that can take an idea and problem solve and find solutions. We don't want kids that
yeah.
have to be spoon fed everything. Not kids. They don't want young adults, new workers, new employees. They want them to be able to
Mm-hmm.
be
Yeah, there was
thinkers.
a a list I saw a while back, and I can't pull it up right now, but one thing that does stick out is that was a list of essentially uh, behaviors that they're looking for in people.
Right.
You
I
know.
saw that. Like Google and a couple other places had traits that
Hmm.
they were like, can we have more of this?
Yeah, yeah, and there's even other people who are heads of companies who aren't even necessarily looking at, where you went to college and where you graduated from. It's more like, what are you able to bring to the table? Like, just because you have a piece of paper that says you went to here does not necessarily give me a real deep understanding of what your capabilities are. And I do know that that
Right.
whole idea of going to college does signal a particular mindset and a particular ability,
Hmm.
that you
Hmm.
will work a little bit harder and you can overcome the challenges of these difficult courses and all that. But and I can understand how that's tied into it a bit. But when it's said and done, are you able to come into a business or a company and just hit the ground running, or do you sit and
Right.
wait for instructions on the regular?
Right.
Right, like, so
Right. Well, and also, we've certainly seen that a college degree doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out there and get a great job.
yeah, no, it doesn't.
And so I think we have to also be aware of, maybe this is just my bias. I have a degree. My husband has a master's. My family's all collegey people, and how much of that is that we have kind of, in this capitalistic society, that we have told people this is what you must do, so pay this, pay this, pay this, and it's part of a system, really, that you're on a conveyor belt from kindergarten to graduate school.
Mm,
And without a lot of thought, it used to be when my dad was a kid, you did a trade route or you did a college route,
Mhm.
and you became the boss. Only it's not like that anymore. Now people move up in companies because they're really good at what they do, or there's way more entrepreneurial opportunities, or it's just not the way it was before. And even if it may not have even been that way for a long time, but I think that we're a lot of times convinced that that's the ticket. When Alyssa left high school, the vice principal came running after us and said, wait, you're leaving? And she says, yeah. And what are you going to do? She said, well, actually, I'm going to go to cosmetology school. And, I've been coloring people's hair in my backyard.
Mhm.
And I think I want to do that. And she's like, but Alyssa, you would have been so successful if you'd have just stayed the
Oh,
course.
wow.
You would have, it's almost like you could have been somebody.
Mm.
And Alyssa was so insulted. Now Alyssa owns her own home, has a business, has employees,
Mhm.
um, because she followed her interest. And
Has
I'm
she
not,
gone back to see that principal?
no, she has not bothered. And I think that, and I remember this is kind of an interesting little segue on this, because we were so used to kids following their interests. We just did whatever needed to be done to follow. We lived like school didn't exist. And
Mhm.
so, Michael has an MBA, Katie has an associate degree, and Alyssa has a cosmetology license. And I remember somebody saying to me, I love that you are as proud of your daughter with her cosmetology certificate as you are with your kids with degrees.
Mm.
And it was like
Mhm.
this wake up call. And I thought, oh, yeah, the world
Mhm.
thinks that's not that good. I had forgotten my suburban roots, where
Mhm.
the world thinks that blue collar job is somehow less than. Forget the fact that the plumber makes more than the school teacher.
Oh my goodness,
you,
right?
you know and
Oh,
and
yeah.
so he's gonna, Alyssa even has people when she first started, because she started working at 18, and she had people when she was maybe 20 say, well, this is all fine and good now, but what are you going to do later? What are you going to be when you grow up?
Mm.
Like, when are
Mhm.
you going to go back to school to get something to be? And she was like, this is my career until I change my mind. I mean, this is how we live. I mean, she didn't say all of this, but she did to me. She goes, well, why, that's so weird that people feel so um emboldened to say, yeah, this is all fine, but what are you going to actually do? You're so
Mhm.
smart. Why are you doing this? Well, because you're
Mm.
paying $2,000 for hair extensions. Why wouldn't I do this?
Yeah.
you know
Well,
um
and I think it's that false advertisement too of what college can offer
yeah,
you. It's not a surefire direct path to a corporate job
right.
where you're able to really impact the company. And when you're an entrepreneur, or at least you find that niche area that does speak to you, makes you want to get up every day, that's
Mm-hmm.
where you feel like you can make an impact. That's
Right.
where life has meaning. And under discussed are those license type jobs where you do not have to go to college. You don't need the 4-year degree
Right.
to become a yoga instructor, but my God, you love yoga. And
Right.
boy, could you do a lot of work in the community with
Exactly.
your yoga certificate that takes what, 8 months to
Mm-hmm.
do,
Mm-hmm.
possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and same with, so many other different.
And isn't it how interesting? And maybe now that somebody said that to me, and I'm hearing you, how our we have that little twinge in our head that says, yeah,
Yeah.
no, they didn't. I didn't have that twinge at all before until somebody said that, and I'm like, oh, I forget. This is what a lot of people who have not had a whole unschooling road before this, that they're still on that track where they think, um, yeah, but I want more for them. Wait,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is more? What do you really think is more? What are you following their interest, making the money they need to live? Um, what would be more?
Well, it is about redefining what success is, because we
Exactly.
have a one size fits all success bubble, and it's not the case. And like you said, the whole idea of this blue collar versus college, this need to compare and contrast.
Hmm.
I mean, our society would not function without blue collar workers.
Right.
And those are vital human beings for how our world works.
Hmm.
And there is even quite a bit of evidence to say that we're in trouble in that department, because we've pushed college so soundly and
And
hard
we've
for.
convinced people that it's less than to choose a different
Yes.
path. And
Yeah, and then do you follow Mike Rowe at all?
uh-huh, uh-huh.
He's the Dirty Jobs guy.
Yeah.
He has a whole thing about, right, like trying to help people reimagine what blue collar work is, and what kind of a career you can make out of it, what it does for society. And I appreciate people like him being able to speak out in that regards, because people, like we do with podcasting and having conversations, the more people bring that to the forefront, the more people recognize that there are other options,
Right.
and that's okay. And at the end of the day, what truly matters is, are you excited about getting up and
Right.
going to do what you're doing? Do
Right.
you feel like you're contributing to society in a meaningful way? Those are the questions that I want my children to be able to answer for themselves with a resounding yes.
Hmm.
And whatever that looks like for them, then I am 100% sold.
Right.
And with my oldest, we he's doing a community college. He did the dual enrollment thing where he
Uh-huh.
did community college while he was in, like, his 11th
Right.
grade year, 12th grade year. And he determined around 16, 17 that he wanted to do a diploma for simulation and game development.
Hmm.
And so we sat down, we looked at the whole curriculum and the plan. And as he's done it now for the last couple of years, he's getting close to being finished. He decided he also wanted to simultaneously go ahead and do an associate's degree. Now, whether or not he'll take that associate's degree and they further and go to 4-year is still yet to be seen, because what I've hoped that of all the things is to recognize that there is no rush.
Right.
Like this idea that you have to go from bam, 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 like these, skip to the next stone immediately after the last one you jumped off of, is not necessary. You can stay on a stone for a while
Right.
and you can look around and you can interact with the environment. You can dip your toe in the water.
I think it's interesting too, because don't we kind of, as humans, we don't like that I don't know what to do
Mm,
phase. And so we hurry up to get to college because I don't want to sit in this I don't know what to do
mm-hmm.
phase.
Mm-hmm.
And even though getting to college doesn't really solve it, it just pushes it off and costs you a lot.
Yes.
And I'm not saying don't get college degrees, because we do that, but don't do it unless you have a reason to.
Right.
Like Michael didn't. He had always said, "I'm not going to go to college. What do I need that for?" And I was like, "Don't say that to
Yeah.
Grandma." And and then he was a exchange student and went to Japan,
Mm.
and he came back and he said, "You know what I want to do?" I'm like, "What?" Because I want to be in the Peace Corps. And I'm like, "Oh,
Oh.
interesting." Because I met this guy on the plane, and and he was having this different experience, and then he comes in and he goes, "Guess what? Peace Corps requires a degree. So you're gonna
Oh.
have to help me figure out how to get that." And he did. And he took the assessment test, and he had to worked his way through that, and then took community college. Only took the classes that could transfer to the local university, so that he wasn't, he
Mm-hmm.
had everything was like really clearly laid out. And then he got a degree, of all things, he got it in journalism, because he thought maybe I'll be a travel writer. This kid that had the ceremonial breaking of the pencils.
Right. Wow. What a full circle moment, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so he got his degree. He was magna cum laude, and it was because he goes, I don't understand why people don't think this is interesting.
Yeah.
Because he was 19 and 20, as opposed, I'm like, they haven't had it crammed down their throat for years. That's
Mm-hmm.
why they don't think it's interesting.
It got turned into
And
drudgery versus excitement. And
yeah, and so he got his degree, had fun at college. He was a radio DJ. He, he did river cleanup. We learned to scuba dive so they could do that. He just like engaged in life,
yeah.
because that's how he was raised. But he got a degree because he needed it. to do
Mhm.
the thing that he wanted. And he did go off into the Peace Corps and went to Nicaragua. And
How long did he do
um,
that for?
2 years.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing.
It's a 2-year gig.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was an experience. And now he just got a job at a software company, and he, because of his Spanish, which I had never taught him Spanish, I don't know Spanish, but he had learned it to do his Nicaraguan thing. He'd taken some Spanish in college as his um, um, foreign language, but nothing like immersion to really have to
Mhm.
learn it. And so he got this job because of his Spanish speaking. And so now he does risk management for companies like Toyota, and whether they need to get certain software programs that this company in Dallas makes. And he primarily deals with the accounts from Mexico.
See, and how in the world could you have ever predicted that?
I know. I
That's what's so
know. No
yeah,
possible
there's just
way.
no way to predict that sort of niche
Right.
space that he is able to fill.
Yeah. And people say, well, don't you think they need a foreign language? Well, if they need it, they'll get it.
And I had just had that conversation with my daughter the other day. I took German in college. I could speak no German at
Hmm.
all, like
Yeah.
not even a little bit.
I know.
And
I
that
know.
was a waste of a year and a half in my mind. I mean, sure, I was able to interact and do the things I
Uh-huh.
needed to do in the classroom setting, but I never went to anywhere
Hmm.
where there were
Hmm.
German speakers. And it was it's
Right.
just that box to check, and that's an unnecessary thing for us to be doing on a regular basis, particularly if we're spending a ton of money for it.
Right.
Now, would that money have been better served to send me on a trip to Germany? Yes, yes, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely.
well, so
Right.
just before we wrap up, I wanted to see if there's
Yeah.
like something that people might be surprised to know about you, like any interesting talents or interests or
Such an
hobbies.
I'm such an open book. My only, I have a grandson that I hang out with a lot whenever I can,
Oh,
and so we have Friday night sleepovers, and I did. Oh, this is interesting that I don't think I've told too many people. We sold our 5-bedroom house and moved into an over 55 apartment building
okay.
where there's an elevator, and I'm on the 5th floor and I can see out far, and it's like I'm living this city
How
life.
about that?
And there's a person that cooks for us downstairs, and there's a gym on the 3rd floor, and I'm actually the youngest person here, but
That's awesome.
but I want people to consider thinking about, and again, it's that kind of misconceived ideas of what it's about. This is a beautiful apartment, and it's not, but we think over 55, well, then that's like nursing home. And I remember telling my husband that, "Are moving me to the nursing home?" And but no, I have really good Wi-Fi, and I run my business just fine. They have a hot tub that I don't have to clean. They
Yes.
have all this kind of stuff. So that's an interesting thing people don't know.
That's why, yeah, that's neat. I mean, I've
Yeah,
always seen those and wondered, what that would be like by the time I get to that point. And I'm 50, so I mean, it's not like I'm
yeah,
that far off of
you're
of that.
not. And so one of the interesting things is that a lot of times people don't consider it until they're really old, and then they don't really. Um, it's
They don't get
harder.
to
It was
utilize
harder
it.
to get out to crowbar ourselves out of that house,
Mhm.
and but we didn't need all those
Yeah,
rooms. We didn't need all that space. We have a little pond behind the apartment building that we walk the dogs around,
that's great.
and it's only 5 minutes from my grandson, so that's good too.
Yeah, simplify, right? So you can really focus on
Right.
the things that you wanna focus on. That's
Right,
wonderful.
because if somebody gets sick or something happens when you get older, you don't have the bandwidth to do that, get out of your big
Mhm.
house, you know? So why not do it while everything's going well and you can make your choices and do the things you want to do? Again, we don't we don't talk about this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
We don't talk about what do we do when the kids are gone? What do we do for ourselves? What do we do? Um, the kids move out and you still maybe have 30 more years.
Uh,
What are you going
absolutely,
to do?
and
I don't know. Let's figure it
yeah.
out.
I think that's a great point to make. And, maybe we just need to have a second podcast and talk about
Right,
that.
right. Well, you've got a 19-year-old. You're like on the cusp of it.
Yeah, he's 19 and then my daughter's 15.
Yeah, yeah.
And she's funny. She's like, I am not going to be an only child. He cannot move out.
I know that was when my younger one went to school, was that Katie went off to New York and Michael went off to the Peace Corps, and she's like, this is not what I was expecting. It used to be we would have Michael's heavy metal playing, Katie's Broadway show tunes, and then Alyssa's Britney Spears, and the house just reverberated, And then it was like, okay, it's kind of quiet.
Right. It does. It changes.
Yeah.
It changes significantly. That's why I love watching these younger families raising their kids now. And I'm so happy to be able to help them navigate this world, because they are in such an amazing, bright, busy, chaotic, yes, but it is a time unlike any other.
So many opportunities.
Yeah, so many opportunities. Their kids are like little sponges. Right. Their family is just bustling with ideas and energy. And I just want them to be able to embrace it and love it. And because now that we have this opportunity to look back on those times and see what we were able to do, and that feeling is it's a powerful feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. So here we are, still creating community, still doing it no matter what, because
being our serial planner selves.
I love that title.
So is there anything you would like to offer to people as sort of a closing for, support or something to keep in mind as they're navigating these waters of either homeschooling, unschooling, or even transitioning from school to homeschooling?
Right. I think go over my unschoolingmomtomom.com website. Has a bazillion things for you, because it's been there for a long time. I've been doing this for 25 years, where I've been writing and sharing and talking. And so there's a lot of information, because I think that success comes from a couple of things. You need the information, and you need support, and you need to take a little action on your part. I think that third part is often overlooked, because we can spend a long time procrastinating and just, I need to read a little more first. You just need to step forward. And so I would say you don't have to do this alone. There are, just like we try to find out how our kids learn best. How do you learn best? Do you learn best with a course? Okay. Do you learn best around other people? Okay. Do you learn best where you can read something late at night? I have all these different ways. Do you learn best by listening, like to podcasts or watching videos or things like that? I have all kinds of things that can help you get more comfortable with this unconventional approach that will help you have more connection with your family, and it won't be, you won't have doors closed. We're always afraid that doors will close if we choose something different. Oh, that's not really true. More doors open. So I think that, overcome your fear. Go ahead and step out anyway. You're not going to get to a place where you have no fear.
Growth doesn't happen in safety.
No, not at all. And so just remember, you only have one life. And so you want to live it. You want to have great experiences. You want to not make your decisions from a fearful place. You want to just learn to ride with fear in the passenger seat, not in the driver's seat. I think that might be a good visual for you. Don't think, oh, everybody else has no fear, it's just me. Everybody has fear. We just do it anyway.
Thank you for listening today. I would love to get your insights. Did you learn something new? Did this conversation calm any fears you may have? Did it help you sort through your own self-talk or worry about homeschooling, unschooling, or transitioning from school to home? You're welcome to send me a message through Instagram, which is where I spend most of my time these days. My Instagram page is Let 'em Go Barefoot, at Let 'em Go Barefoot, or you may email me at letemgobarefoot@protonmail.com. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.